Welcome everyone, welcome back to the shop. It's been a while since I've had any videos with any content at length, so I thought I'd kind of come up with a pretty cool video for you today, I believe. It's interesting to me, and it's something that will help anybody, especially someone starting repair jobs, wiring, electrical, whether it be ATVs, motorcycles, anything, home electrical, anything. But we're going to talk about waterproof joints, and I'm going to talk about proper soldering techniques. And I'll show you something. I have an old four-wheeler that I haven't quite changed out all the connections that were originally done, and I'll show you a bad one that I'm just kind of keeping an eye on. I'll show you what to look for.
All right, this is just a real basic, inline twist. Makes a real nice solder joint. Just kind of start out with an X, and I just like to keep everything as nice as possible. You want to wrap tight. You want to wrap next to your last round, and you don't want any exposed, like sticking out, protruding wires that can poke the insulation. See, I had some there, and we're going to go back in and kind of really twist those down tight. That way we're not going to be poking our insulation, and it'd be a lot better that way. And for this, I like to start with just a tiny little bead of solder at the base of my soldering iron. And what that'll do, that'll just help heat the wires quicker. Because if you just have a dry iron and you're holding it at the bottom of the wire, it could take a while for the capillary effect to start taking place, and you just want to really get it flowing well. That flux will really allow that solder to get in at every little area that it needs to. Give a little extra heat, and that's a real strong solder joint. Alright, now we want to place the hot glue, and you can do this in a couple different ways. You could try to kind of wrap it around the entire wire. I just like to do a little pass, kind of a bead on both sides, and that allows me to be able to get the heat shrink tubing over the top of it, because if you're not careful, you'll just have so much glue, it'll be a mess, and you won't be able to get your heat shrink on it. But just do one side, and this is when sizing your heat shrink is really kind of key. You want to make sure you have the right size for the job and the wire you're using. And there's better heat shrink than others too. Some shrink more than others. You just kind of trial and error. You just kind of figure out which one works best for you. So I'll just keep going here, and then I'll put a couple beads on, and then now we'll slide the heat shrink on. Alright, make sure you get the heat shrink to me the best you can in the middle. You want the joint inside your heat shrink. That way you have as much on each side. That way it'll seal better on the insulation. Just hit it real hard with the heat gun. I'm not using a reflector here because I'm trying to blow most of the heat away from the GoPro and not just cook my GoPro too in the process. But yeah, you can really see the hot glue really kind of get hot and melt and flow. Yeah, that's really cool. And this is pretty good heat shrink tubing too. It makes a seal. Probably would make a waterproof seal without the hot glue. It's just extra insurance. I like using it, and yeah, there's really no reason not to. Here's another example. This is without solder. See what you think about this. I just twisted the wires together like before, and then bring in the heat gun. Kind of makes it a little bit easier to see. I thought I would show you this. Yeah, that's dead waterproof joint. It's a really good way to do it. I've been doing that way for years. Alright, I just want to give you a better look at that. This is actually a really strong joint. There's no solder applied to this. It's just the twist, the hot glue, and the heat shrink. And I tried to pull this apart off camera, and it wasn't coming apart. I thought I was going to knock something off the table, break a $300 GoPro in the process. So I didn't try too hard. You probably could, but in a pinch, if you don't have the solder, I mean that's one good way to do it. So yeah, there we go. Real strong. That's neat. That's one way to do it too if you don't have any solder. Alright, I just wanted to show you this up close with the solder joint, hot glue, and heat shrink. That's about as good as it gets in my opinion. I mean, it's You're not going to have any resistance issues, and it's just going to work for you. It's going to last. One on top, that's just without the solder, obviously. Another good option. Um, I mean, being waterproof, it's just not going to have the tensile strength, obviously, as the one on the bottom. But, I mean, they're going to perform basically the same. I like the solder for, you know, as the solder flows in there, it does create a better joint overall. And if water were to get in there, the soldered joint is much less likely to corrode to a point where you'd lose functionality or your resistance would change.
All right, well, so far this has been pretty awesome. I've only managed to fail to hit record 4 times. So everything's going smoothly, kind of like normal. But what we're gonna do, I'm gonna clean up a little bit of the solder station area, and I'm gonna show you a lot of mistakes people make with crimping those connectors on. And that's the first thing you check when something's not working is past crimp connectors that you didn't do yourself. So let's show you how not to do it first, and then I'll show you the right way. Okay, so we've seen these 1,000 times, right? These crimp-on connectors. So you've stripped your wire, and you've twisted this. You've taken this thing, and red wire, red connector, so hopefully we're using this in the sequence that it should be. I like to use red for positive and black for negative, but so you got this crimp in here. You got your wire in your crimp. You're not exposed to insulation on the back side. And then you crank down on this thing. Takes 2 hands. It'll release. And then you've got this thing. Now you have aluminum crimped to a copper wire. And how well is it crimped? It's anybody's guess. I've done this and just was able to pull them right off, but that's crimped pretty well. Let's take this to the next level. I'll show you a better way to do this. Okay, so the next step better. Notice my tinning is not a good job on this. Let me wipe this off. Don't start with an oxidized tip. Now it's bright again, bright and shiny. So the next best thing would be to tin this up with a little amount of solder, just enough to get it tinned. This is flux core solder, obviously. Now we'll crimp the end of it on. So with your freshly soldered wire, and you want to keep the solder amount just enough to where the capillary effect will pull it into all the wires. If you go too much with that, you're going to end up not being able to push it through your connector, assuming that your connector is the right size for the wire. So a little bit sticking out on the end, no bare wire showing at the back side, the insulation's up inside it. Crimp it and get it stuck in the tool. There we go. So now, what has happened? The wire stays round, doesn't mash flat. Mash flat can cause increased corrosion abilities. So when you've got all these braids, these wire fibers, and they're laying flat inside of a crimped area, that's really bad. It's the worst possible scenario for a joint. I've seen so many of them fail, and anytime I was working on a buddy's UTV not too long ago, and the wire, the wiring harness is wrapped in a corrugated thing to kind of keep them all together. Well, the first thing I started doing was stripping off all the wiring, sheathing, whatever that stuff's called, it's corrugated and holds it all in there. Peel it all back, and I find one of these. Let me get it out of here real quick. I find one of these. It didn't look too ominous, just one of those end-to-end couplers, crimp couplers. First thing I did was cut it about 1 inch behind it cut it 1 inch before it, removed it, added the same gauge wire back with my style connections, soldered, heat shrinked, and the vehicle started and ran like new. So there is a time and a place for these things, but knowing how to use them properly and keeping them waterproof is key. If you just take a wire and you don't tin it up first and you put it in these junk crimps and you clamp it down, the first thing you're clamping aluminum against copper. They're dissimilar metals, they want to corrode anyway. So tin up your wire. If you must use crimp connectors, or let's just say you want to use bullet connectors and you want to be able to separate them. I don't have any bullets, but I got these things. 1 second. Let's just say you want to crimp because you want to be able to do this. You want something removable. Well, that's okay too. But smear, after you've crimped, after you've tinned your wire, put it in here, crimped it, and you've put this together. All right, you've put this together. You put it together for a reason. You're wanting to hook up lights or you want to do something. Well, cover this with chapstick or beeswax. Melt a candle and run over it, and then slide a piece of heat shrink tubing over it, and then shrink the heat shrink tubing. You can always slice your heat shrink and take it off, and then, of course the wax is not permanent, but corrosion causes anybody that's restoring anything so much headache. It's awful. Let me show you something on my four-wheeler that I want to fix. All right, so I wanted to use this as an example of what not to do. This is vehicle ground on my old four-wheeler. I purchased this four-wheeler. It was a farm vehicle and it was in bad shape, and I basically built it back from nothing. And I haven't gone through all the electronics yet. I had to go through a lot of them. A lot of them were replaced, but if you look here, can you see in the camera? That sheathing, the insulation on this negative wire, I don't even know where that goes. It probably doesn't even need to be there now, but it doesn't even get up inside the connector, the crimp connector. All right, so on the crimp connector, there's no wire coming out the end, so we don't really even know if it was a good crimp. And I can promise you this was not tinned up before it was crimped. So I'm keeping an eye on this. It needs to be replaced. Check out this main vehicle ground. There are broken copper wires that they probably bent them back because they wouldn't fit into the crimper itself. I mean the crimp connector itself. It's too big around, so it's only grabbing on the nut on one side, on the bolt that goes to the battery on one side. So this is an example of what not to do. You need a proper size crimp with a proper size bolt hole so everything makes proper connection. This will need to be replaced. I'm just keeping on it. There's no starting issues and everything's fine. It's good vehicle ground, but not long term. Man, look at that. I may replace that sooner than later. But that is an example of what not to do, y'all. All right, so that was a nice, fun little video. And, you know, you can expand on this subject a lot. There's a lot of things I didn't cover. Types of solder. I think that was I don't know what I had, 60-40 lead tin. It doesn't even say I've had it forever. I don't know. But keep in mind, when you solder, you've exposed yourself to lead, probably formaldehyde, probably a lot of dangerous things. Wash your hands really well, and you know it's good to have a fume extractor. I couldn't do it for the video, but yeah, that's not good not to have that. So make sure you do that. And another thing, we didn't go over this black electrical tape, the sticky god-awful mess that you always get into when you're fixing someone else's work, right? But this has its place. I use it to secure wire nuts in boxes for electrical lighting and different things in homes. It's more of just a cover than anything. I don't use it for waterproofing. I assume that's probably one of its qualifications, but I don't use it for that. There's much better ways to it. And there's commercial solder joint waterproofing products out there. But I mean, you know, it's just something else to pay for. And hot glue is cheap, and there's just ways to do that where you don't have to buy extra products and keep up with them. Everybody can usually find their glue stick. I'll use this if I want to bind wires together and that has nothing to do with the joint. Multiple wraps, try not to stretch it. When you stretch it and you stick it, well, it just pulls on it, especially if it gets hot, it's just gonna unwrap and leave a sticky mess. This has its place, but I try to keep it out of my ATVs. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope some of it was informative. Thanks for watching.